Well, Bev, I just love doing things with you. Did you ever think that we'd be doing a podcast together, by the way?
Well, I always wanted to do one because I felt we were meant to do one, but I actually, there was a time I doubted we'd ever actually get to this place.
Okay.
But here we are today.
Here we are. And, I just want to say I'm so honored to have you part of our global leadership team on so many initiatives that we're doing. The Church for One in 138 countries around the world, the Plumline Leadership Network for another, and, the Plumline Institute, the educational arm.
I know we have so many things going on. We can't keep track of them half the time, but it's amazing.
And by the way, how long have we actually known each other now?
Well, I was trying to work it out. I think it's been like 6 or 7 years. I always struggle because, I kind of heard about you first before I kind of met you. And then there was a little time before we really kind of began to work together. But it's probably been about 6 or 7 years now.
Yeah. And did we first meet? Was it at a conference that we first met?
We did. We first met personally at a conference. But I had actually heard about you like a year prior to that because someone gave me one of your books, The Political Spirit.
Okay.
And I remember reading it and thinking to myself, this guy knows stuff. Because it's one of those books where you read it and it was so relevant in the moment for where we were. And it really helped me and spoke to me. And so I was really impressed by you. And we were actually organizing a conference with a friend of mine. So I said, come on, let's get this guy. He knows some stuff. And we should have him. And we did a wealth conference together, I believe.
Right.
That was the first time that we actually met in person. When I actually got to see you.
Yeah, and I remember when you spoke, you spoke with such wisdom and clarity as you communicated. You're a great communicator, Bev, and I find that you have a great compassion for people and you have a deep sensitivity to God's Spirit and what God may be doing in any given moment. And I've always loved that about you. And so I enjoy working with you. Yeah, it's awesome, and we have had a lot of fun together. We've had a lot of crazy moments now. And
we have. Yeah. We've had a lot of crazy moments now. But, I do want to say, though, I remember really well when I first met you because you were so different, than other ministers or pastors that I'd met before. I kind of had an idea of, how pastors were. And you were really, really different to that. And I remember that first conference, hearing you get up and speak where you were talking about wealth. And you start off telling your story and the story where you were living in a car. And I was like, oh, my word, this guy was living in a car, and then you continued and told the story and just some incredible teaching that you came out with in that conference. And it really changed my life. And what you were doing really impacted me. I know because it was kind of a little while after that I actually reached out to you because I'd wanted you to come to South Africa where I was at the time and we couldn't work it out. But you invited me here to Vancouver to come to be here with you. And I always remember coming here for the first time. I was so nervous to meet you in person.
Oh, my gosh.
I was so nervous. But I remember, coming here. And of course, because I came to the church, but it's here at the studio, at your film studios. Yeah. And I didn't fully understand that you were this entrepreneur as well, that you had film studios. So I kind of arrived here and I was like, wow, this guy is doing like so many different things. And I have to say I was a little bit intimidated at the time.
Oh, no.
But what I really loved about you was when you brought me and made me feel so welcome, just such a humility on you and just made me really feel part of the family. Immediately, and I just felt like I was at home from the first time that we that I came, and we continued to kind of move forward from there. Yeah. That was my first time, and that was the first time we had one of our long conversations.
Yes, we've had many of those, I must say. Really good ones, though.
Really good ones, and that's part of the reason I'm really excited about this podcast is because those conversations that we had, just talking about life and talking about God and our walk with God, and just they really shaped me. They were just things that you said in those times we were together that I went back and it changed my life. And and that's why I've always said I wish we could take our conversations and kind of open them up to other people because they help me so much, and I know that they would help others. So that's why I'm glad that we get to do some of that on this podcast.
Yeah, awesome. It's going to be incredible. And I just want to say I appreciate you and Robin and your whole family. You guys all moved here from South Africa. That's a big deal.
Can you imagine?
Can you imagine? You all moved here, which was quite the journey as well, getting here.
Yeah.
And, you got here, you moved to Canada, relocated, you sold your property and your home and stuff and just shifted here. That's That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Coming all the way to Canada over here. How has it been like for you in Canada, by the way, thus far that you've been here? What's that been like?
That's like the question. Well, I'm really grateful. I am so grateful to be able to live in a country like Canada, coming from South Africa, which does have challenges.
Sure.
Of course, shifting country is always difficult on any level, but we've really experienced the grace of God. And I love being here because this is really family for us. And I know that God moved us here because God's doing something, and you always want to go where God is. I always say the best place to be is right in the middle of God's will, which is what we feel like it is for us in Canada.
Yeah.
And we're adjusting, We're kind of getting there.
You're saying now. It's so true. Geography often has to do with God's assignment and destiny in our life. And we see that throughout the narrative that God has given us in the Bible. For example, like God called this guy Abram to leave his hometown where he grew up and where he was kind of like born and everything. And God said, I'm going to take you to a strange place. And I want you to kind of start all over again, pitch your tent, so to speak, again. And I'm going to make something great of you. And I'm going to make you a father of many nations. And no doubt, God fulfilled his promise to Abraham. He's become the father of many nations, no doubt.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes when God leads us to change our geography, it's always connected to destiny. And there's a blessing in it as well. And there's a grace that accompanies it. So, even if someone's listening to this or watching this the first time, they're like, hey, I remember God recently moved me or brought me into a new place, or God's leading me to move or change my geography.
Yeah.
Destiny could be tied to that decision. So it's important to weigh it properly and evaluate some of the spiritual dynamics, so to speak, connected to that move. It's not just the practical things you have to think about.
Yeah.
Because obviously you thought about all the practical things.
Of course,
It was a big deal. But there's also a weight of God's intention in what
right.
you're doing. And you said you like being in the center of God's intent, his purpose, and what he's trying to do. We should all want that, really, in life. And
But I mean, you've experienced that.
Yeah.
I mean, I know, obviously, your background. You actually were born in Pakistan.
That's-
grew up in
yeah,
Pakistan.
yeah.
I mean, you weren't always a Christian who loved Jesus.
no, not at all.
So you've changed countries. I mean, you've moved and shifted nations as well in your walk.
Yes.
And that was instrumental.
Instrumental. When you say that, Bev, it reminds me of how God is really a premeditated God. Like he already wrote a book about us before we were born, he says, right?
Yeah.
He wrote his thoughts, his dreams, his desires. He put our gifts in there, our talents, where we would be born, where we'd live, the geography of our destiny, so to speak. Yeah. And you're right, that's what happened to me. And I was just barely a teenager in Pakistan when I left the country to come to North America, to make my family proud. And of course, I was a devout, staunch Sunni Muslim, and I would kind of let's put it this way, I would come home after school, and kids get to play, right? But no, I had to go study the Quran 3 to 4 hours a day, okay?
Because you were going to be the best Muslim there was, I imagine.
Exactly, right? And my family wanted to really do something with me, and my dad died when I was young, actually, when I was 7.
Okay.
And so my mom later remarried my stepdad. I call him Dad. He's an amazing guy, and great criminal attorney around the world, international attorney, big law firm and all. And I learned a lot of things from him. But, in reality, when I was there, my family wanted to protect me, really.
Okay.
Because I had been in Canada already as a young baby.
Okay.
That's what had happened because when my mom got married, my dad took her on a 3-month honeymoon around the world.
Oh, what a good guy.
Yeah, it's amazing. Huh? So they stumbled on this place called Niagara Falls in Ontario. And when they visited that, my mom said, I love this area. I love this neighborhood. I'd love to live in Ontario. And he said, okay, no problem. And so next thing you know, they moved and shifted home and they lived here. So I was here when I was probably 1 year old. I kind of snuck in the country, so to speak, with my family, and not snuck in, came in legally, by the way.
Let's just be clear about that.
I was brought here legally, and it was awesome. And these days we have to clarify these things.
Yes,
Can you believe
please
it?
do.
Can you believe it? And so that's kind of what happened. But then when my dad died, my family wanted to take me back to my roots and to my culture.
Okay. To kind of just establish you
me
in that.
solid because you're at a young age, and you want to make sure that really, at the time I didn't know what they were doing, but they were trying to protect me from the Western culture, for lack of a better word.
Okay.
So that's why I'm studying the Quran more and, living out my Muslim faith in a Islamic republic. The Pakistan is a Muslim country.
So that's really interesting to me. So your parents, so there's actually quite an intentional thing, even as a Muslim family. It was really intentional to ground you in, let me say, the 10 A's of the Muslim faith.
Yes.
and they were aware of what might influence that.
Yeah.
That's really so. It's really intentional that they do that.
Well, as Muslims, when Muslims grow up, their faith is their entire life. It's not like faith is a part of their life.
Mm-hmm.
Their entire life is supposed to emanate from what they believe. So their career, their discussions, their family concepts, their culture, their patriotism, all of that kind of flows out of their belief system in Islam. So it's a very...
So it kind of shapes the whole culture. So
Shapes your
the
culture, yeah.
religion, for want of a better word, actually shapes your culture on all levels.
Exactly. And that's kind of how you grow up. And that's why sometimes as Muslims, you perceive the Western world as altogether, like Christian, for example. You think that's Christianity, but it's not.
Okay.
Whereas in the West, it's an independent culture. It's not really based on
Community
or
and
faith.
Any of those types of things.
Yeah, so sometimes you misunderstand the culture, and there's a misunderstanding coming into this culture.
Yeah.
Not realizing people are
Well,
just
it's completely different.
completely different in that
The whole
regard.
culture is completely different. So then that was quite something for you at that young age to move from Pakistan back to Canada.
Yeah,
That must have been a big thing.
Yeah, and I first came to the States because my neighbor used to live in the USA,
Yeah.
and I didn't know anybody, so I came and stayed a couple months at his house, and then I moved out on my own fairly quickly. I was just working at a restaurant called Shawnee's in the States, which is like as a waiter. I kind of started there, and I started going to school. So I'm going to school and working and paying my way kind of thing.
So you've always actually been, this, I can just imagine you as a young guy, you were like going to figure it out and go big in the world.
Well, yeah, and I didn't quite know anything at that point. All I knew was, I remember, by the way, I started working when I was like 13, not by necessity.
Yeah.
But I just loved doing stuff. And I was working for somebody making these insulators that go into these electrical outlets and stuff, and were, they're bad conductors of heat and electricity, basically. I used to make those.
Okay.
And then I was a private tutor, and I was, offering tuition to people on the side and just having fun and going to school as well. So I guess I was, always
You're kind of
productive.
always busy doing something. You always got a plan, always got some kind of business going on
something
somehow.
was happening, and it was nice as a teenager to be making a little bit of your own money, so having extra money to do
But
stuff.
you know what? That's just a typical entrepreneur.
Is that
It was
right? Yeah.
even when you were young. All the entrepreneurs I know, they all have stories from when they're young.
Yeah.
They're just making money, and it's fun for them.
Yeah.
And so I can see that now in your childhood.
Yeah, and that's something good to note if someone's out there and they're like, hey, I noticed my son or my daughter's like that. Hey, there's something there. Maybe you should water that seed and help them move in that direction.
Exactly.
But that's kind of happened to me, and I came here and had to figure things out, and just said, like you said, I was like, hey, I'm going to figure this thing out. And then I came to move to Canada because I knew I was a Canadian citizen, and I thought I'd have better opportunity in Canada. So one day I got in my car and I just drove all the way from Georgia, the state of Georgia. That's where I was.
Oh my gosh, that's quite the drive.
Yeah, I was like I sounded like a Pakistani Southern Elvis guy, and I gotta have the Elvis hairstyle going.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah,
You had
I was
the
crazy.
Elvis hairstyle.
I don't know what I was doing, but I had this Pakistani Southern accent kind of going on at the same time, a little bit. So I was a unique, interesting.
I wish we had a video of those days.
Thank God we don't. Thank God we don't, And so I just got in the car and I drove across, 18, 20 hours straight from there to Toronto, actually, to the Toronto border. And once I arrived in Canada, I had this old beat up vehicle, and I remember buying it for, I think, $1,500 at one point, cash back then. It's my first car. And it was a 1987 Nissan Sentra moped, I used to call it. And so I just packed my stuff and I was getting across the border, and they said, oh, welcome to Canada.
Yeah.
So great. And they said, well, we have to charge you duty and taxes on this car and this and that. And I'm like, what? And they said, well, does this thing have air conditioning? I said, it does, but it doesn't work. Okay, another $200. Does it have a radio or stereo? I said, yep, but it doesn't work. Another $200. And by the time they're all said and done, they were going to charge me so much money, and I didn't have all this money.
Wow.
Like, I didn't know when you cross the border, it's gonna. How do you do this?
Yeah.
And they said, well, sir, there's the bridge, the Queen Elizabeth Bridge. You're welcome to Canada. You can walk on the bridge, but you got to leave your car here. I'm like, wow, that's not going to be fun.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know what to do. So I walked over this bank that was on the border, just walked in, and there was a manager there. I was like, I don't know what to do. He said, what's wrong, sir? I said, well, I'm over here trying to get into Canada, and I just realized that I can't take my car in because I got to have all this money, and I can't get a hold of money. I didn't really know anybody here in Canada.
Yeah.
And so I was like, and this bank manager, this lady, you know what she did, Bev?
What?
She gave me the money.
What?
She just gave me the money. She goes, so I'm just going to give you this money, and you can pay it back to me whenever you get settled.
Wait,
in
who
and
does that?
And there was no loan, there was no paperwork, there was nothing.
And you didn't know her at all?
I didn't know who she was. And
Wow.
she gave me this money, And I remember writing down our information number, and I said, and then I got into Canada. That's how I paid my duties and fees. I got in.
Yeah.
And then when I got money, I sent it to her. And I till today don't remember her name, don't know who she was.
Oh my goodness.
But she was like an angel to me.
I was going to say, maybe she was an angel there at the border, because if God wanted you in Canada, he was going to make a way.
He was going to make a way. And
Wow.
this gracious person that helped me, and again, that speaks to geography and to your point. God was calling me out of Pakistan and wanting to situate me into Canada.
Yeah.
And eventually all the way down west, because I have a whole story of how I got here.
Yeah.
But in reality, geography is important to what God may be carrying out in our lives. And so sometimes we shouldn't take for granted when God picks us up and moves us from South Africa or Pakistan or Indonesia or Germany or Asia, wherever God's taking you from one place to another, or situating you in those places even.
Yeah.
You know, oftentimes it's related to your God's divine purpose over your life. And so God had to have me in Canada. I had this favor. And that's another thing. Oftentimes God will pave your path with favor. And that's what's favor for me. This lady showed me favor.
Yeah.
She was so graceful to me. Who does that, right? And so I'm in Canada, and here I'm getting all situated and settled in.
Wow.
And kind of like now I'm kind of getting in business, okay? Because I kind of started business even as a teenager, so you're right, when I was in America. So I came to Canada and I kind of continued on in business a little bit and trying to make sense of my life and a little bit of education and business and kind of figure this out.
I just have to say, though, it's amazing to me how you just, I mean, you were young at that age and you just kind of came and started building a new life. You know, it's actually, I mean, I know you probably think, oh yeah, that's just what I did. But when you think about it now, that you just arrived in another country and you crossed a border and like you said, I started getting situated in Canada. I'm like, oh my word.
Yeah, like how do you really do
like,
that?
Like how do you really do that? Like how do you pick a place to stay? I mean, you know, when we moved, I was on the map, like where am I going to live? Where's this? Where's schools? Where, you know, and yet you just kind of moved into it. And that's quite amazing.
And you know, sometimes you don't even know. Like you said, like you're right. I don't know. Like when I'm hearing you say it for the first time, I'm like, yeah, you're right. I just don't know how that happened, but it just kind of happened.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, you know, there's this statement like a dog in the hunt don't know he's got fleas. You know what I'm saying? Like, okay.
That sounds like a Georgian Texas. I don't know, something in the South. I don't even know what that means.
So it's like sometimes you just don't know what your problems are when you're focused and moving forward in something, right? You're just doing something.
You just don't know what you don't know, but there's fleas.
Yeah, and sometimes you just got to get up and go, right? And do what you're supposed to do sometimes. And that's kind of what I was doing. And so here I am getting situated in Canada, like you said.
Oh my God.
And in business. And then guess what? Then things began to get a little hectic for me, you know?
Okay.
Because some of these business people I was associated with, they happened to be Christians.
Okay.
And, you know, I, of course, was a Muslim and a devout Sunni Muslim. And, you know, my mindset was very different than theirs. You know, you know, to me, these Christians were completely deceived. As Muslims, you believe that the Christians have changed the Bible and they do not follow the final book that came from God, which is the Quran, or the Prophet Muhammad, the final prophet that came from God.
Okay.
And so Jesus was revered as a prophet. We revered him as a prophet, of course, as a Muslim I did. But by no means would I have ever thought of Jesus to be God manifest in human being form as he came, or the Son of God, or God in any way. That's deity was off the table for me as a Muslim or for any Muslim. So the greatest sin, for example, a Muslim can commit is to confess and believe that Jesus is the Son of God. In fact, you know the Dome of the Rock that dominates the skyline of Jerusalem? It basically says there that God is not a father and he has no son. So that is something that you definitely, you know, will understand for a Muslim. It's so difficult to believe that Jesus is the Son of God. So that's how we're raised. Like when I was a child, my uncle would have prayed the azan, which is the call to prayer, the Muslim prayer, in my ear. Every child gets that happening in our family and Muslims around the world. And we grow up hearing the azan at least 5 times a day. And you're praying 5 times a day, reciting these type of things. And
that's often those prayers that they pray.
Yeah, they pray. Yeah, and when you pray, and a lot of times Muslims don't even know what they're saying because the Quran is in a very ancient Arabic script.
Okay.
So they may not even know. So even people that speak Arabic cannot understand what the Quran says.
Really?
In a sense. But it's a
Okay.
very poetic book, and it's like it rhymes a bit sometimes. And so you say these things, and they kind of just flow, and you get used to them. And you say all these things, and of course that's why I remember I used to go to that school
Yes.
to study the Quran 3 to 4 hours a day, because I had to kind of understand what it was saying,
Okay.
recite it, learn it, and that kind of thing,
Yeah.
and hopefully understand it to some degree.
Yeah.
But and that's kind of where Muslims come from.
Okay.
And so in reality, for me, when I was in Canada now, some of these Christians, to me, they're like they've turned Jesus into God. So in other words, my understanding was Jesus came as a prophet sent from God.
Yes.
And now they've just exalted him into deity, and they began to worship him, which is a form of blasphemy to a Muslim.
Okay.
And Jesus to a Muslim is only second to Muhammad. So Muhammad is the big deal.
Okay.
He's the final prophet
And he's
of Islam.
and he's the prophet of God.
Yeah, the final prophet
Okay.
of God, and actually apostle too.
Okay.
The term given to Jesus is one of a prophet, but also a rasul, which is kind of an apostle, someone that comes with a book.
Okay.
So not just a message, but a book.
Okay.
Because the New Testament came as a result of Jesus. Like Moses was called that too, because he brought the law, the Torah.
So the big problem they have is that Jesus is the Son of God and that he's God.
Or
That's
deity.
the big
yeah. And
the
also, Muslims don't believe that Jesus was crucified on the cross either.
problem. Oh, okay.
So they believe that, and I used to believe this stuff too, by the way, that Jesus was taken up off the cross and someone else was crucified in his place. And
Who took him off the cross?
Well, obviously they don't know, but this is their theory.
Oh, okay,
And,
okay.
and by the way, no one's been able to find the body of Jesus, by the way. And so, that's another problem. But
Well, I can see why you thought the Christians were deceived, because
Yes.
there's a lot of disparity here.
Exactly,
Okay.
like we're on many fronts, and so, but it's all around Jesus. If you'll notice, so looking back, I realized all the disparity, all the issues around Jesus, and of course, I know that, like for example, the Quran says that Jesus is the Word of God.
Yes.
Now that's something very interesting.
Yeah.
And it says that Jesus is coming back and that he was born of a virgin. All this stuff's there.
In the Quran?
Yeah, in the Quran. So I believe these things. But Jesus was also called the Messiah. And no other prophet was called the Messiah in the Quran except Jesus.
Okay.
So Jesus is actually mentioned more than Muhammad in the Quran, for example.
Oh, really?
So Jesus has got quite a place in the
Okay.
Muslim heart and in the Muslim world. And I respected Jesus, but not as the Son of God, not as deity in that sense, but just as a prophet for some reason.
Okay.
And that's as far as you could go. And your mind is programmed your whole life as a Muslim to oppose the deity of Jesus.
Okay.
That's how you're raised.
Yeah.
That's in the prayers that you recite. Everything you say is the complete opposite in essence of what I believe today.
Okay.
This is how vastly and diversely different and drastic
Yes.
this is.
Yeah.
And so for me as a Muslim, coming into this world, in this part of the world, and meeting business people that were Christians, obviously that sparked some conversations,
I'm sure.
right?
Yeah.
And there weren't just conversations, there were debates, okay? And some of them were intense.
Yeah.
For me to just tell them that you're deceived, your Bible has been changed, you're incorrect what you're believing, and the Quran is the final book, and I'm just going on and on about these things, and they would be talking to me sometimes, and they would respond with their questions and answers to my questions and concepts, but we weren't really getting too far.
Yeah.
In our conversations, and here we are supposed to be doing business, and now we're having
Okay.
these conversations. But that's kind of how I got introduced to Christianity.
So
in
that's
reality.
interesting. So you come to Canada, and immediately you kind of are, because you're in business, you're not I want to say confronted, but you're brought face to face with these Christians, and you start having these discussions. Well, they would come up because it's your life. This is what you believe, and you being you're going to correct everybody around you.
Yeah, I hope I wasn't
And
doing
let them,
it.
let
Maybe
them
I
know
was.
that they are deceived. I could just see you doing
and
that.
So, and I was a little intense back then, and so anyway, one of these business guys, they say to me, hey, listen, why don't you come to a business convention? And it's in the States, and I'm living in Canada, remember,
Yeah.
at this time. And it's in the States, and there's going to be people that are multimillionaires, very successful, and they're going to be teaching us how to be successful in business. And then he made this statement. He goes, if you want to learn how to be successful in life, learn from somebody who already is.
Yeah.
And that made sense to me.
That's wisdom, yeah.
I'm like, yeah, why not? So I said, okay, let's go. And we jumped in some buses and coaches, and a bunch of us went down.
Yeah.
And we go to this auditorium. There's 20,000 people there, okay?
Yeah.
Huge Coliseum. I'm like, wow,
Yeah.
this is huge. And so we're in the middle of this business convention. Everything's going great. And I'm hearing some amazing stories and principles from people that are successful. I'm like, yeah, I'm learning some things here.
I just find this interesting because my brain is like, you're a Muslim and you're here, and the idea sometimes that we have is that you kind of stay in your own communities and you don't mix with Christians at all, and you're kind of away from them. But yet, because of your business kind of background and you were wanting to learn, and like this guy said, come and learn from the best. You're all about this because it's business.
Yes.
And how did you feel? I mean, did the Christian thing come into it at this point, or not really?
No, because I think people realize that Muslims are very spiritual people.
Yes.
And I've also seen Muslims are aware of graces and gifts in other people's lives. Like they have a sense that this person's got something on them that's good, and I should work with them. They're even aware of that.
Okay.
And that really goes back to the blessing that God put on Ishmael.
Okay.
That's different than the blessing of Abraham that God put on him unconditionally.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of times you see in the Middle East and in Muslim countries, regardless, it's unconditional blessing. There's a blessing on them for wealth and supply that's unusual. They don't have any real creative inventions or anything like that, but they have access to so much wealth and supply that comes out. There's oil everywhere in the world, but their oil is sweet oil.
Yeah.
It doesn't cost much to refine it and bring it out of the ground, for example. There's all these kinds of scenarios.
Yeah.
But regardless of that, you're right. I was just going to be successful.
Yeah.
And it's okay to learn.
Yeah.
In fact, Muslims believe you should travel the world to gain knowledge and learn if you should. You're willing to make some effort,
Yeah.
And so here I was willing to learn.
Okay, so you go to this conference with these Christians.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know they were Christians. I mean, there's everybody there. There's all kinds of, there's just people.
Yeah.
Some of them are Christians.
Okay.
But of course, the Christian guy invited me.
Yeah.
So I go into this convention. I'm hearing some great things. And on the Saturday night, they say to me, hey, listen, on Sunday morning, they're going to have something called a non-denominational Christian service. Now, I didn't know what that was. I'm like, what do you mean? And they said, if you want to come to this service, we'll give you a front row seat. And I'm like, uh-huh. And he goes, as soon as this thing is done, you can keep your front row seat for the remainder of the business conference. So I'm thinking, wow, I'm going to get right in the front where the action is for this business convention. I've been sitting in the bleachers pretty much. I like to sit in the front. I don't want to miss out, right?
Yeah.
And so this was a great enticing offer.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, how bad could this really be, right? Like there's no priest that's going to be speaking or a pastor. I'm not even sure if I thought pastor. I probably didn't know what a pastor was. And there's a business guy's going to be speaking. They tell me there's a business guy, the same business guy you heard talking about business. One of these guys is going to be speaking. And they pointed out one of these guys.
Okay.
I'm like, yeah, that's fine. He's a business guy.
Yeah.
And how bad can it be? And in my mind, I'm like, I didn't understand church because to me, it's not a church. It's a coliseum. It's a convention center.
Yeah, you have a different picture because in your mind you understand going to
a mosque,
to a mosque, and that would be like a religious
a
service.
place of worship. Or so I'm not putting this together, right?
Okay.
And so I said, sure, I'll take the front row seat. Thank you for the offer. So I come the next morning and I noticed they removed anywhere from 30 to 50 rows that were right in front of the stage. They cleared them out. Okay. So they still had seats, but they were like far back now.
Yeah.
So the first row started much further back. And so I was like, why are they wasting all this space?
Yeah.
And so I walked up to this person that was kind of one of the conveners there. And I said, hey, listen, why don't you put more chairs out so I can sit closer to the front? Because why are you wasting the space? And they said, oh, no, sir, we can't do that. I said, well, why not? And they said, oh, no, sir, something is going to happen here. I said, really? What's going to happen? And they said, sir, just sit down and you will find out soon.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, I'll sit down. I'll keep my eyes on this front area. Yeah. I'm like, I was curious.
Yeah.
What in the world would be happening in this empty space,
Yeah.
before someone's going to speak, right? So
Yeah.
you can understand it's just the innocence of it.
It's when you've grown up in church, you understand, you get all of it. But when you haven't, you don't. It could be strange.
Yeah, it was strange to me. And so then this businessman gets up.
Yeah.
And he was a businessman last night. But the first thing he says when he comes up, he says, Jesus is the Son of God. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how dare he say that? Yeah. How could he say something so blasphemous, right? And he says it publicly to everybody.
Yeah.
And then he says, there's only one name given amongst men which you can be saved through and experience salvation. And that is the name of Jesus and Jesus alone. And then he said, if you believe in Jesus, you're guaranteed to go to heaven. And then he said, if you deny and reject Jesus, you will burn in hell forever.
Oh dear.
Okay, so I'm like, whoa. And I'm like, I can't believe this guy's talking like this. and I'm getting a little offended at the same time. I don't know what to do, this guy. And I'm thinking, this guy, I thought Christians are deceived. This guy's like super deceived. He's way out to lunch here, okay? This elevator is not going all the way up. Something's definitely wrong with this guy.
Yeah.
But he was so bold. He was so sure that you could actually go to heaven. Now, as a Muslim, there's no guarantee to go to heaven for a Muslim.
Oh.
Absolutely no guarantee, though.
Okay.
There is some elements of, if you become a martyr to defend Islam, that you'll wake up in heaven with 72 virgins or something.
Yeah, I've heard that,
there's that dynamic, which is, the jury's still out on that, but, a lot of Muslims do believe that. But regardless of that, there is no guarantee for a Muslim to obtain heaven or be assured of heaven in any way, shape, or form. You just want to do as many good deeds as you can in hopes to one day get access to heaven.
So it's on like, if you do all the right things and do the fasting and do the prayers and do all the things you have to do, then you get to heaven, or maybe get to heaven?
Yeah, maybe. And even then, there's no guarantee God might let you in. That's all you can depend on, right?
Okay.
And so that's pretty much the best it gets.
Yeah, so that really is in your face if he's saying, then you through Jesus you can get to heaven.
But the funny thing is, even though Muslims may hear that sometimes, as a Muslim, for some reason, it's like you don't see all that right away. You're just kind of like, but I'm shocked by it. That how could he be so confident? How could he be so assured? But it wasn't enough to motivate me or move me in any way. It was just, I was becoming aware of something that I wasn't aware of before, And then he makes this other statement that really got me. He held up his Bible in his right hand, and he says, there's only two books that claim to be the written word of God. He said, the Bible is, and the other one is not. Now, when he said that, I knew he was talking about the Quran.
Yeah.
That really got me. I'm like, that's it. This guy's definitely lost it. I need to talk to this guy. I need to straighten him out. He's completely misinformed at best, and he's wrong. And I need to educate him. And so I'm going through all this, and right about now, he asks everybody in the auditorium, he says, can you all stand up? And he began to kind of give this invitation for people to respond to his message and kind of invite them to come to the front, kind of thing.
Okay.
Some kind of invitation's going on. I'm not quite clear what's happening at this point, but I get up and I say, this is my chance to talk to the man and confront him. I get up and I run to the front. I'm one of the first guys there, thinking I'm going to talk to the guy right now. The opportunity is ideal. And by the time I run to the front, other people start getting up from their seats and they start running. Okay. So I thought they're coming to ambush me. So I don't know what's going on here. I'm like, and by the time I got to the stage, I'm thinking I better turn around. I don't know what's going to happen. But literally 2,000 to 3,000 people are jumping out of the crowd and running to the front and packing themselves in this open space, remember?
Yeah.
And I'm stuck there. I was literally stuck to the stage. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't even move an inch.
Wow.
That's how many people were packing up this particular space.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know what's happening here. I don't know what to do. And I remember seeing the businessman. He had like these tears, coming down his eyes as he was looking over us all. And he said, I want to lead you guys in a prayer.
Okay.
And he begins his prayer by saying, I believe Jesus is the Son of God. I'm like, this guy, I can't believe it.
And you're in the middle of all these people who are praying this.
They're praying all this after him. And so I started saying my kalma, which is like the Muslim statement of faith. I'm like, I don't know what these guys are doing. I'm going to repeat my kalma because these guys are just absolutely nuts.
Yeah.
And so after he finishes his prayer thing, and everybody starts going back to their seats, and I start to head to my seat, this beautiful couple, business associates of mine, come up, give me a hug and say, congratulations. And I'm like, what for?
Yeah.
And they said, well, you went to the front and you became a Christian.
You're like, what?
I'm like, are you crazy? I said, I'm a Muslim. Don't you ever call me a Christian. I said, the earth can shake, the mountains can move, but there's nothing on this earth that can make me confess that Jesus is the Son of God. And they just looked at me because they're like, oh, okay, back up. Yeah. And I left there and I didn't know what the problem was here with these people.
Yeah.
And then I come back home, back to Canada, right? And, living my normal life.
Do you, because, like you said, all these statements were so inflammatory to you as a Muslim.
Yeah.
Yes, you understood you were in a non-denominational service. Is that a typical reaction? Would that be a typical kind of reaction?
At various degrees for Muslims. Some Muslims may react in a very sophisticated way or a more civilized way. And I was still civilized.
I'm sure you were.
There's even degrees of people that may react much, much more harshly than I did, right? And even worse than that, right? Unfortunately, that's not the entire Muslim demographic of the world, a very
Yeah.
small percentage of them react that way, and we have
Yeah.
certain problems around the world we could point to.
Yeah.
However, that's not how all Muslims are.
Yeah.
But in their heart, this is a big deal for them.
Yeah, because it was like as you're telling this, I mean, you were sitting there, and these are things that went directly against what you believe.
Yes.
And oftentimes when you're in church, you kind of think, oh well, this person's just going to change. But I love how you're explaining how you felt and how you were responding. So I got to go set this guy straight in
Yeah.
that, because that's really who you were and how you were responding. So. I find that fascinating, knowing that you actually did come to know Jesus. So tell me then, how did you come to know Jesus? I mean, if in that environment you're hearing the word being preached at you, and that's your initial, I want to say, reaction to that. Yeah. So what happens that you actually come to believe in Jesus as the Son of God?
Well, these conversations continue with some of these business people, right? And in those conversations, I'm getting more familiar with their language and their lingo, and they invite me to another conference. Again, they give me a front row seat. Mm-hmm. Again, this businessman gets up and he preaches how Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but by him. Mm-hmm. And he's talking about Jesus again. I'm like, oh, here he goes again. And he gives this invitation again. I run to the front the second time.
You do it again the second time?
I'm like, because now I'm like, reacting to what he's saying at that moment, which is also wrong in my opinion at that time as a Muslim. And I'm like, I got to talk to this guy now. But then I realized, oh, this is what they do. They actually open the door for people to follow Jesus and commit their lives to Jesus through this business platform that they've developed. They're just opening it up to people. And I'm like, oh, that's what they're doing. So then I made a decision. I said, if you can do that for Christianity, I can do that for Islam. I can become successful in business. Yeah. I can tell people about the Quran, tell them about Muhammad, tell them about Allah, and I can help them, come from Christianity and their place of deception and actually become Muslims, because obviously they've lost their marbles along the way here. So maybe we can help, do the same thing. And I also learned, remember, that if you want to be successful in life, learn from somebody who already is. And these guys were getting some good results, Bev. They were seeing 2,000-3,000 people at a time come to Jesus. I'm like, well, if they can do it, let's figure out what are they doing? What's the secret sauce?
Yeah.
How are they doing this?
Yeah.
I don't understand what they're doing. And so now I'm kind of spying on them a little bit, okay? I'm trying to figure out.
I think this is so hysterical, because I can just imagine you. I'm going to reverse engineer these guys now.
Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna, like, these guys got something going on. I don't know what they're doing, and can't figure it out really.
Yeah.
And so I now knew the terminology a little bit. I understand what they kind of meant. So I thought when they said I'm a child of God, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. Okay. And sometimes they would say things from the Bible, but I didn't know they were from the Bible.
Okay.
Right? So they would quote a scripture like, you're created in the image of God.
Okay.
And it sounded good. You know, like, it sounds pretty cool, know? And I'm like, where did you get that from? Or walk by faith and not by sight. And I'm like, yeah, wow, that sounds really good. Yeah. I didn't know it was the Bible, you see. But, things like that, they can get into your heart because the entrance of God's word brings light to your heart, right? And so now I'm back at our third convention, Bev.
Third time lucky.
I mean, nothing like the third time, right? Yeah. So here I am now at a convention, and this time I'm here to spy on them. And they invite me, give me my front row seat again. I'm like, yep. And I'm watching what they're doing. I'm going to figure this thing out, right?
Yeah.
And so this man gets up again, this businessman. Like, he just doesn't stop. Huh? He was a billionaire, by the way.
Wow.
He owned, I think, 31 companies, multi-billionaire.
Yeah.
His annual personal income was already over $1 billion a year.
Wow.
Let alone his net worth was in the billions.
Wow.
I went to many of his homes. He had multiple homes in the United States alone. And I got to visit some of his massive homes where he would teach people that had net worths of 100 million and 200 million. And you talk to them about things. And I remember going to those moments and just sitting there and listening to him and trying to learn from him. I was really grateful for this man. He taught me a lot of things and affected some of my mindsets early on, not even knowing that they were being affected.
Yeah.
But this same business guy now, he's up there and he's preaching, or speaking, I should say. And he gets up and he says that if you believe upon Jesus, he'll give you the right and the privilege to become sons of God, even if you believe upon his name. And he's going on about Jesus again.
Yeah.
And when he's talking about Jesus, he gets to that point that he's going to do this invitation, which I knew what's going on now, right?
Yeah. Now you know the lingo.
So I'm like, I don't need to respond to this stuff. And so he asked everybody to stand, 20,000 people. So we kind of all stood, the whole audience stood. I stood up, everyone's standing. And while I'm standing there, suddenly the living God showed up. And Bev, I don't know how to describe it to you, but literally the presence of God emanated from him and went right through me, went right around me. And I was literally alone with God. And I stood before him, and I was no longer aware of what's happening around me. And the longer I stood before him, the more I became aware of him. And I had all these questions going through my mind, like, what is God doing here in the midst of such a people that are like blaspheming him by worshiping Jesus? I couldn't figure this out. Like, why would God reveal himself, manifest in this way? But what's really amazing to me is there was not even a question that I'm talking to God, that I'm standing before him. Like, that's amazing to me. Nothing in me could deny the existence of the awesome, almighty God.
Yeah.
And so I'm standing before him, and in the midst of this moment, this presence is intensifying, and all my questions are kind of dissipating. And everything I'd known and experienced in my life was nothing in comparison to him and his presence and who he is. And so I said, God, I said, what are you doing here? I thought these are the bad guys, meaning these Christians.
Yeah.
And then he spoke to me. He said, no, these are my children. And he said it again, no, these are my children. And he said it a third time, no, these are my children. And when he said that, I immediately knew that Jesus is the Son of God. It was as if all knowledge, all experience as a Muslim was nothing in comparison to the reality that Jesus indeed is the Son of God. That's all I knew at that moment, Bev. It was like nothing else mattered. My life, my existence, my experiences, my practices as a Muslim, my studying of the Quran, my offering the namaz and the salat and everything. Nothing. It was nothing. It was gone. And I was left with one reality, that Jesus is the Son of God. It was as if there was no other truth in the universe except that Jesus is the Son of God. And I remember then I said, I'm going to the front. And I remember going to the front. Wow. And I said, Jesus, I believe you are the Son of God, that you were born of a virgin, and you did die on that cross. You shed your blood for me, and you rose again from the dead the third day. And I say, come into my heart, take away this hard, cold, stony heart, and give me a brand new heart that I can love the Father just like you. And that was July 3rd. It was a Sunday at 12:45 p.m. I'm telling you, Bev, I was a different person. I left that moment and something changed on the inside of me. And I'm telling you, that's how I got introduced to Jesus. And I got introduced to the Father, really, not knowing that. But God revealed Jesus to me in a way that I knew who he is. And it's the only thing I actually left with, and knowing that truth. And nothing else really mattered for me. My gosh.
That's so powerful, because it was like, as you were speaking, what I was seeing, it's like this, I would use the word revelation. We used that word, but it was like you said, everything else melted away, and you knew it was God. And then you had this knowing. You just knew that Jesus was the Son of God. Nobody can do that. Nobody can tell you that. You'd heard people talking, you'd had conversations, but it was God who revealed that. It was God who made you to know that. I mean, that's real. That's a spiritual, I don't really use the word, it's a spiritual experience that changed you from the inside out, that no one can deny. And that's really what it means to be born again.
Yeah, it is. And in reality, Jesus, you got to know Jesus by revelation, not by information.
Yeah.
Information may change your mind momentarily. But revelation will change your heart and transform your life. And I'm just reminded of that story in the Bible where Jesus is asking his disciples, who do you say I am? Yeah. And Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, flesh and blood hasn't revealed that to you, but my Father in heaven. That's what happened to you. Yeah. No. It was not a person per se, even though the businessman was speaking. Yes. It was the Father in heaven who revealed himself to you. Yeah. He, like you said, everything else went away, and it was just, you knew that this was God, and then you knew that Jesus was his Son. Yeah. And in that gentleman, he was just proclaiming and speaking forth the truth from God's word. And that's called the gospel, the good news. Mm-hmm. And the gospel is the power of God unto salvation. And that's what happened to me. In the vicinity of the gospel, he revealed himself to me. And of course it was going to change my life, Bev. I mean, that was not something I was expecting, you see.
Yeah, that kind of experience changed everything. I mean,
Everything.
who you were almost like this
Yes.
young man who grew up one way, you came out of that meeting completely somebody else.
Different. And how do you live after that the way you used to? You know, you don't. This is not part of my plan. I wasn't expecting this. I didn't think this was possible. I'd never known or experienced anything like this. And now I'm trying to figure out this new life, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And you know, you brought up how Jesus asked Peter about,
Yeah.
you know, who do you say that I am? And you know, what's interesting to me is I can relate to that a little bit, because when I now have this relationship with Jesus and the Father, I'm trying to figure out this whole thing. And when I would try to talk to Jesus, I didn't know if I could talk to him or not. But when I would pray to God and pray to the Father, I was aware he's listening to me.
Okay.
So I was a little shy because it became real now.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a routine of prayers.
It wasn't just praying out
No,
those
this is
prayers and
different now.
words.
This is me becoming conscious and aware of God as a person now. I'm starting to know his person. I'm starting to know his character. I'm starting to experience his love in a way I've not known. So now this is real. I just met him. He said something to me. And now what do I do? How do you pray? I mean, I don't even have a Bible yet, you see. I hadn't been to no church.
Yeah.
I'm at a business convention. And so when I would try to talk to Jesus, I didn't even know how to talk to him, because my Muslim mind still wrestled with the revelation I got in my heart. Because my Muslim mind was like, okay, how does this all work? But my heart knew, my spirit knew, Jesus is the Son of God. So he is, but I don't know anything else yet.
Yeah, because your mind is still very much, your mind didn't change in that moment. Your spirit got born again and something happened in your heart, but your mind is still...
Well, my being got transformed.
Your being.
And my mind realized it's the truth, but I didn't understand how. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Even my mind knew it's the truth, but I don't know how this works.
It's like your thinking's got to catch up with what really happened in your being, if I could put it like that.
Yeah, and so in this process, when I talked to Jesus, Jesus would gently refer me over to the Father. And then I would talk to the Father, and I would experience his love, and I would realize how unique I am, and how I'm different, and how he made me the way I am, and that he celebrates me, and I don't have to be a copy of anybody else. You see what I mean? All this stuff starts to happen. And then the Father would be like, and I'm experiencing this incredible love I've never known growing up as a Muslim, really, in this capacity, certainly. And in this process, suddenly the Father would whisper into me in my ear and say, son, do you know why you have this relationship with me and this love? It's because of Jesus. Okay. And then immediately this love and this experience that I developed with the Father in my relationship suddenly had the same love and appreciation for Jesus, because you died on the cross for me, because you were not ashamed to become sin for me, because you were cursed for me, because you were wounded for me, because you were beaten for me, because you were humiliated for me, because you were put to shame on the cross, because you were cursed literally for me. I get to have this relationship with you and the Father. So now I have this relationship with Jesus. And the reason I say that is only the Father can reveal Jesus.
Okay.
Because Jesus made the statement. He says, no one knows the Son except the Father. And no one knows the Father except the Son. So only Jesus the Son can reveal the Father, and only the Father can reveal Jesus. And the Father reveals Jesus by his Spirit, which is the Holy Spirit. And Jesus reveals the Father by the same Spirit, the Holy Spirit. So there's this Father-Son relationship that I came into the middle of. And that's why, as I then began to read the Bible, my mind started to understand what's going on a little bit, because I would read things like, that our experience in our relationship, John says in 1 John, is truly with the Father and his Son, Jesus Christ. And if you have the Son, you actually have life. If you don't have the Son, you don't have life. If you acknowledge the Son, you have the Father. If you deny the Son, you do not have the Father. And that Jesus is the only way to the Father. And I'm sharing these things with you that you may experience the life of the Son. The whole message is about the Son, that who overcomes the world, except he that believes and confesses that Jesus is the Son of God. And God says to Peter, the same Peter you referred to, when he said, Peter, you call me the Messiah, you call me the Son of God. I know my Heavenly Father has revealed this to you, because humanity could not do this. Only the Father can, to your point, Bev. And then he said, upon this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not be able to prevail. Against what? The rock of revelation that Jesus is the Son of God. That's the key.
Yeah.
And says, how do you overcome the world? How do you overcome the world? What's your victory in your circumstances and situations in life? Is the revelation that Jesus is the Son of God. It's a bedrock truth. It's a foundational reality.
So often people think, well, if I just get it in my head, then I know, I understand he's the Son of God. But when you're talking about this heart revelation, something changed on the inside of you. It wasn't just, oh, I learned this in my head, but something actually changed in the substance of who you were that forever changed you and brought you into this relationship and awareness of God, who really is a Father, who really has a Son, Jesus, who is the Messiah, but who's real and can be real to us. And I just, I even as you're talking, I just sense, that there are many people out there who they want this. Maybe it's not that they haven't known it, but they want this. You know what I'm saying? Because as you're talking, what you're talking about, this relationship that you have with Jesus, the way that you know him, I feel it even in me. There's like, God, I want to know you better. I want to know you in this way. That's so real. Because I think sometimes we settle, even as believers who we know Jesus, and I'm sure many people listening to us are saying, well, I know Jesus, but I don't know him like that.
Yeah.
And actually, that's for everybody.
Yeah,
that wasn't
for
just
everybody,
for you. You
for
weren't
everyone.
just special.
No,
But it's not just because for people who, were Muslims who convert. But actually, this is for everybody, this revelation.
Absolutely, Bev. And it's important that we sometimes get out of our religious boxes or structural thinking sometimes, like you said. Like it's good to have knowledge.
Yeah.
But knowledge may puff you up, but an experience with God's love will actually build you up, And so experiencing Jesus, he's real. And finding out who he really is, it can be incredible in your life. And God will never force himself on you. That's not what he does. But what's amazing is if you have an open heart and you're willing to seek him. And, most people are searching for answers. And obviously Jesus is portrayed in a certain way.
Yeah.
And he may not have been portrayed as he really is, but he is real. And once you experience Jesus, who undeniably is the Word of God, he's pre-existed. Before all creation, all things were made through him and by him and because of him. Everything exists. In fact, it's said about Jesus, John said this, that Jesus lights up every human being that comes into the world. So that spark in your mother's womb, when the egg and the sperm met, they say scientifically there was a spark, a flash of light. That's the light that Jesus lights up every human being.
Wow.
So we have the signature of his light in us already as creation. We're all created in the image of God.
Yeah.
All humanity is created in the image of God,
Yeah.
but not all humanity has been born of God yet. And outside of Jesus, that's not possible. And outside of Jesus, it's not possible to know the Father. It's not possible to know God. It's not possible to know really who you are actually as well, because you have to know God to discover who you are. And so, if someone is like, hey, I like to know for real if this stuff can be real for me, you got to be honest and vulnerable and just start, hey, Jesus, are you really who this guy's talking about? What this Bible he claims says? Read it for yourself. And ask and say, Jesus, who are you? Are you really are you the Son of God? Did you come in the flesh? Were you born over? Did you really die on the cross? I want to know. And just ask, God, reveal this to me.
Yeah.
I want to know who Jesus really is.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is really a key. It's that heart attitude of really just saying, I don't know. I don't know you this way, God, but I want to know you. Would you show yourself to me? Yeah. It's really the heart and what's going on in your heart and asking those questions.
Yeah.
Asking those questions.
And you might get surprised. It may not be the way it happened to me, but one way or another, God will open your heart, open your understanding.
Yeah.
And then pay attention to what happens after you pray a prayer like that. Because, God's not, look, I don't believe I respect people's free will tremendously. That's the first gift that God gave mankind outside of life. And I respect the free will of people, and so does God. So people have a right to believe what they believe, and they have a choice. And so that's why I'm very sensitive to that reality. And at the same time, they have a choice to seek and search after God. That's why I say ask this question.
Yeah.
Highly recommend it.
Yeah.
And then see what happens in your life. And my gosh, I mean,
You know,
you took me back, Bev. You took me back.
I did
today.
but you know what? This is what I love about our conversations, because
Yeah.
even as I'm talking to you, and I've heard you tell the story several times, but I can feel myself being provoked on the inside to say, Jesus, I want more of you, Jesus. And that's what I love, because every time we talk, God's in the middle of our conversation, whether
Yeah.
we're laughing or talking
Yeah.
about whatever we're talking about. And I know that that's happening for those who are listening with us today. And I'm trusting that their hearts are being provoked, that they're being pulled, and they're going to ask some of these questions, because we all want more of Jesus. He is the answer. He is the way, the truth, and the life. There is no one like him.
Yeah, absolutely, Bev. Wow, I've just had so much fun with you. I don't know what to do now. I mean, you got me all excited about, passionate about this.
We are excited, but you know what? The good thing about a podcast is we have many episodes yet to come. Lots of good things to talk about, lots of conversations to have. So I want to encourage those of you listening, if you've enjoyed this today, please subscribe to the podcast for us, or follow us on all the social media platforms. Drop us a comment in the comments if this has touched you, if you have a question. We love to hear from you. We're just starting out, and we're looking forward to lots more fun together.